He handed me a suitcase on my birthday. Not a hug, not a slice of cake, just a damn suitcase at the gates of a nursing home. I stood there in my best Navy suit, the one my late wife loved, staring at my only son like he was a stranger wearing my boy's face. The gospel songs from morning service still echoed in my mind, but no hymn could drown out that kind of betrayal. You think you've seen ungrateful, wait till it comes from your own blood. And what I did next? You'll want to hear it. Subscribe now and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I raised that boy with calloused hands and a prayer in my mouth. Every Sunday I made sure we were in that old red brick church by 9 o'clock sharp, the sunlight cutting through the stained glass like God himself was watching. He'd sit beside me, legs swinging, hair neatly combed, whispering the Lord's Prayer just a second behind me. I remember thinking, this boy will grow into a good man. I poured everything I had into him, my time, my sweat, my name. I worked 35 years at the same auto plant, never missed a shift, not once. Even when my back screamed and my hands stiffened from the cold steel, I kept going. Because that's what fathers do. They build. They protect. They love until it hurts. When his mother passed, I didn't know how to fill that silence. The house felt bigger than ever, like every room was grieving with me. I cooked simple meals, turned on the TV just to hear a voice. My son Malik would call sometimes, quick, distracted, always busy. I'm working late, Dad. We'll grab lunch soon. Soon never came. But I understood. The world moves fast for young people. Still, when he said he'd take me out for my birthday, I believed him. I pressed that navy suit, shined my shoes, even sprayed on cologne that had gathered dust for years. I thought we were finally turning a corner. I thought he remembered. I can still see the way the wind moved through the trees when we pulled up to that place. Willow Creek Senior, living the sign, red letters, gold and proud, like it was something to be celebrated. I thought maybe we were picking up someone or volunteering or hell, anything else. But when he parked and looked straight ahead, not at me, my chest tightened. His voice was low practiced. Dad, this is for the best. For the best. That's what people say before they bury you while you're still breathing. I remember staring at his hands on the steering wheel, noticing they trembled just slightly, like maybe a small part of him knew what he was doing was wrong. But he did it anyway. When he walked me inside, the air changed. It smelled like lemon polish and loss. A nurse smiled at me with that kind of pity you can feel in your bones. I looked around and saw men sitting by the window, eyes cloudy, waiting for someone who'd stopped visiting years ago. That's when I understood what kind of place this was. I wasn't being cared for. I was being stored. He handed over paperwork like a man returning a rental car. Power of attorney, signatures, stamps. I didn't even know when he'd gotten them signed. My name was on the page, but those weren't my decisions. My son took control of my life with the same ease a man closes a door. When he left, he said, "You'll thank me one day." I wanted to tell him that day would never come. The first night there was the hardest. I sat on the bed with my coat still on, staring at the wall until the colors bled into one another. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. A preacher's voice came from a small TV down the hall, reading from the book of Job. I wondered if Job ever felt like this, not punished by God, but by the blood he raised himself. I closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come. I saw flashes of Malik as a boy running across the churchyard in his Sunday shoes, holding my hand at the county fair, whispering, "I love you, Daddy." Those memories didn't comfort me. They hurt like fresh wounds. The next morning I woke up to a knock on the door. Breakfast tray, eggs, cold coffee, bitter. I forced myself to eat because I needed strength, not for the day, but for whatever was coming. I watched the nurses move from room to room, their sneakers squeaking against the linoleum, faces kind but tired. They called me Mr. Grant like I was a stranger to my own name. I tried to smile, but every time I did, it felt like my skin didn't fit right. The place was clean, quiet, and wrong. Too quiet. Too clean. Like a church with no choir. Days bled together. I counted them by the way sunlight fell through the blinds. Mornings were sermons over instant coffee. Evenings were whispers from other rooms, cries muffled by age and regret. I started walking the hallways after midnight when the staff was thin, and the world was asleep. That's when I met people the world had forgotten, veterans, widows, teachers, each carrying their own ghosts. One man, Mr. Ellis, said something that stuck with me. "We don't die in here, we just fade out slow." I swore I wouldn't fade. I started writing again. Old habit. I found a notebook in the supply room and filled it with prayers, plans, and the truth. Every page began with the same line. They think I'm done, but I'm not. Writing made me remember who I was. A father, a man who'd worked his whole life and deserved better than pity and plastic cups. But remembering also meant feeling and feeling hurt. Every time the phone rang down the hall, I hoped it was him. It never was. That kind of hope can rot you from the inside out. One afternoon, the chaplain came by. He was young, maybe late 20s, full of that bright energy that only comes from people who haven't seen enough endings yet. We talked about faith. I told him I still believed in God, but wasn't sure about his people. He smiled sadly, said, "Sometimes God hides his blessings in dark places." I didn't believe him then. I do now. Because that blessing walked into my room 3 days later wearing blue scrubs and a tired smile. Her name was Ruby. She adjusted my blanket like she'd known me forever and said, "You don't belong here, Mr. Grant." I didn't know what she meant, but I felt something shift inside me. Maybe it was the way she said it, like she saw the man I used to be, not the one my son had turned me into. She told me about her church, about her grandmother who always said, "When the world tries to bury you, remember you're a seed." That night I lay awake repeating those words until they felt like armor. I started helping around the place, fixing chairs, oiling door hinges, small things that made me feel useful again. Every screw I tightened felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Ruby noticed. She'd bring me extra coffee sometimes, sit with me after her shift, talking about life outside those walls. Her laughter filled the room in a way that made the air lighter. But the more I rebuilt myself, the more anger simmered beneath it. My own son had taken everything, my freedom, my dignity, and now he was out there living like he'd done me a kindness. I couldn't let that stand. One evening, Ruby brought me an old Bible someone had left behind. Inside it, tucked between brittle pages, was a folded lottery ticket. "Looks like somebody was saving their miracle," she joked. I almost laughed. Almost. Later that night, alone under the dim hallway light, I checked the numbers on the ancient computer in the lounge. The screen flickered and my heart stopped. Those numbers matched. Every one of them. I leaned back, staring at that glow like it was holy fire. I didn't feel joy. I felt power. Quiet, dangerous power. The kind I hadn't felt since before the world decided I was done. I didn't sleep that night. I sat there, the ticket in my hand, the hum of the vending machine, the only sound. It felt like God had just handed me a key. Not to wealth, but to freedom. To justice. I folded that ticket, tucked it inside my shoe, and smiled for the first time in weeks. I whispered into the darkness, "You thought you buried me, son. You just planted me. And what I did next, you wouldn't believe it if I told you." The silence in that room wasn't just quiet, it was alive. It pressed against my chest like a heavy hand whispering that I didn't belong to the world anymore. The air reeked of bleach and boiled cabbage, a mix that clung to your clothes and made you forget what fresh air smelled like. The staff moved around with polite smiles, faces soft but hollow. They said, "Good morning, and how are we feeling today?" like I was part of a group that no longer existed in time. I'd nod, pretending to be fine, but inside I was vanishing inch by inch. That bed beneath me was too clean, too stiff, too empty. I used to sleep next to the hum of my wife's breathing. Now the only sound was the radiator ticking like a slow heartbeat, counting down my usefulness. At night the building changed. It wasn't peaceful, just still, like a pause before something breaks. From the hallway came faint groans, the creak of wheelchairs, and somewhere far off an old gospel song playing from a radio too low to recognize the words. I tried to pray once, but the words stuck. Faith doesn't leave you, it just hides when you're ashamed of how far you've fallen. I stared at the ceiling until the patterns blurred into shapes of faces I used to know. My wife's eyes, my son's grin, my own reflection, all fading like chalk in rain. Breakfast was the same every morning, scrambled eggs that tasted of nothing, toast too hard to chew. They gave us juice in tiny plastic cups like communion for the forgotten. I sat by the window pretending to watch the street, though there wasn't much to see, just the parking lot, a few tired cars, and a tree stripped bare by winter. Sometimes I'd imagine my son walking through those doors, his face softened by guilt, ready to take me home. But day after day, that door only opened for nurses' food trays and new arrivals with the same confused eyes I had when I first came here. Hope has a smell when it dies. It's faint like dust and disinfectant. I tried talking to the man in the next bed, Mr. Jenkins. He'd been a deacon once, sharp in his suit and stronger than steel. Now he mumbled Bible verses in his sleep and called for a daughter who hadn't visited in years. When I asked how long he'd been here, he said long enough to forget what my house looks like. I didn't ask again. Some answers are too heavy to carry when you already have your own. The nurses meant well, I could tell. But kindness that's part of a routine doesn't reach your heart. One of them, a young man named Theo, liked to hum while he changed linens. Once he said, "You're lucky, Mr. Grant. Your son visits sometimes, right?" I didn't correct him. I just nodded and let the lie sit there between us like a thin blanket against the cold truth. People see what comforts them, not what's real. I'd learned that lesson too many times. Every afternoon I walked the hallway with my hands sliding along the rail, the smell of polish following me. My legs ached, my knees popped, but it gave me something to do besides wait. The walls were lined with photos of smiling seniors, playing cards, painting, gardening, all lies. Those pictures were from the brochure, not from here. The real residents sat in wheelchairs facing the same blank television screen, their eyes glassy, their spirits somewhere else. I thought about how the world builds places to hide its guilt. Nursing homes, they call them, care centers, but they're really warehouses for forgotten stories. One day a woman down the hall started crying, not a soft sob, but the kind that comes from the soul, wild and broken. The staff rushed in, shut her door, and turned up the music in the lounge. I stood there in the hallway listening. That sound cut deeper than anything my son had done, because I knew if I stayed here long enough, that could be me. A man stripped of every name, crying for someone who'd already moved on. The worst was the afternoons. That's when time stopped. Too early for dinner, too late for visitors. I'd sit by the small window, sunlight fading across the floor, dust floating like tiny ghosts. The silence would crawl under my skin, reminding me how far I'd fallen from the man I used to be. I thought of the house I built with my bare hands, the porch where I taught my boy to ride a bike, the oak tree we planted when he turned 10. Now that house probably had new paint, new laughter, maybe even new owners who didn't know the story of the man who built it, board by board. That thought hurt worse than the cold. But then came the nights when I started hearing things. Not voices, memories. The scrape of a chair, the echo of my wife's laughter, Malik calling from the yard. They'd come and go like flickers of film, each one sharper than the last. I'd reach out and whisper, "I'm still here." Sometimes I'd swear the air answered back. Loneliness can make a man see ghosts, but maybe ghosts are just memories refusing to let go. After a week I started keeping notes again, writing on scraps of paper I found in the common room. I didn't write prayers this time. I wrote reminders. Who I was, what I'd built, what was stolen from me. Each word was an act of defiance, each sentence a small rebellion against being erased. I'd hide those pages under the mattress, small pieces of proof that I still existed, because if I didn't tell my story, no one else would. One afternoon a storm rolled in, heavy and loud. Thunder shook the windows, lightning flashed white across the room. The power went out for a moment, and everything plunged into darkness. I sat there feeling the hum of the generator kick in, and for a second it felt like the whole building exhaled. The silence that followed wasn't the same. It was deeper, thicker, charged. I thought about how storms cleanse the air, how sometimes destruction makes room for something new. That night I couldn't sleep. Something in me had changed. The silence no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a countdown. I started noticing things after that. The way the head nurse locked the medication room twice a day, the way mail was sorted behind the counter before it reached us, the way paperwork vanished when families stopped paying attention. I realized the silence here wasn't natural, it was manufactured, designed to keep people compliant, to keep questions buried. That discovery burned through the numbness that had been keeping me still. It woke something dangerous and alive inside me, the kind of energy I hadn't felt in years. That night when everyone was asleep, I walked the halls barefoot, the tile cold beneath my feet. I stopped outside the office door, hearing faint whispers from a small TV. I looked through the window, saw the administrator counting checks, smiling. My name was on one of those envelopes. My son's signature on the payment line. A transaction. That's what I'd become. Property transferred for convenience. I felt my heartbeat steady, slow, deliberate. The silence didn't hurt anymore. It sharpened me. I went back to my room and sat on the edge of the bed. The storm outside had passed, but the air still smelled like rain and electricity. I knew what I had to do. The world thought I was finished, my son thought I was broken, but they were wrong. They'd mistaken silence for surrender. And what came next, that was the moment they learned what happens when a man has nothing left to lose but his name. When they took my phone, they smiled like they were doing me a favor. "It's for your own good, Mr. Grant," the nurse said, tucking it into a drawer like I was some fragile relic that couldn't handle modern life. I didn't argue. I just nodded, but something inside me turned cold, sharp, metallic. That small click of the drawer closing felt like the sound of a lock turning inside my chest. They thought they were protecting me. I knew better. I wasn't being cared for. I was being erased, one decision at a time. And that's when I stopped being patient. I sat on that bed, staring at the spot where my phone had been, realizing that it wasn't about the device. It was about control. Without that phone, I had no voice, no number. No proof I existed outside those beige walls. That's how they do it. They take away your little freedoms first, the ones so small no one would think to fight for them. Then they take the rest. I could almost hear my son's voice in my head, calm and certain. "It's safer this way, Dad." Safer for who? For him, maybe. For the man who signed my name on papers I never saw. For the son who thought his father's silence meant surrender. I walked to the window and pressed my hand against the cold glass. Outside, the winter sky looked bruised gray, fading into darker gray. Somewhere out there was the life I'd built, my home, my tools, my wife's garden. Now all of it belonged to someone else. I felt a strange stillness. Then not sadness, not rage, something heavier. The kind of weight that anchors you before it lifts you into action. It wasn't the end of me. It was the beginning of something else. I started paying attention. Every routine, every locked door, every lie disguised as kindness. Breakfast at 7, medication at 9, lights out by 10. Every moment designed to keep people quiet, compliant. There was power in noticing, I realized. Observation was my weapon. I learned the nurses' shifts, the sound of each key turning, the click of the medication cart wheels. I saw which residents had visitors, which ones didn't. I watched the mail deliveries, the envelopes my son sent, the ones marked legal. I wasn't fading. I was studying. One morning, while the others were playing bingo in the common room, I slipped into the hallway near the administrative office. The door was open just enough for me to hear my name. "Grant's paperwork is complete," the head nurse said. "Power of attorney settled. The son will handle all withdrawals." Withdrawals. My stomach tightened. My money, my savings. Everything I'd earned with blood and bone was now in his hands. That's when the silence inside me cracked. I wasn't just angry. I was awake. That afternoon I walked slower than usual, leaning harder on my cane just to make them underestimate me. People look at an old man and see weakness. But they forget we've spent a lifetime surviving things they can't imagine. I'd fought layoffs, sickness, grief, wars that weren't on any battlefield. I'd built my life from nothing more than willpower and prayer. And this place, This betrayal, it was just another test. Only this time I wasn't planning to endure it. I was planning to end it. At dinner, they served meatloaf. It was bland, dry, tasteless. I ate every bite anyway, calm and quiet, my face unreadable. Across from me, an old woman named Mrs. Turner whispered, "You have that look the one men get before something changes." I smiled faintly. Maybe something already has. She nodded, eyes shining under the fluorescent lights. "Then make it count," she said. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window and thought about every choice that had brought me here. About the day I taught Malik to drive about the first time he called me sir instead of dad. Respect had turned to distance long before the nursing home. I just hadn't seen it. Love makes you blind. Betrayal makes you see. The next morning I walked into the chapel at the far end of the building. It was empty except for a flickering candle and an old wooden cross. I sat in the front pew and whispered, "Lord, I don't need miracles. I just need clarity." The light from that candle trembled, and for a moment I thought of my wife. Her voice came back to me soft and steady. "Dignity isn't given. You hold on to it no matter what they take." That was the moment it happened. The spark, the quiet fire. I straightened my shoulders and felt something settle in my chest, resolve. When Ruby came in to check on me later, I must have looked different because she stopped mid-step. "You okay, Mr. Grant?" she asked. I nodded. "Never better," I said, and meant it. From that day forward, I wasn't the man who'd been left behind. I was the man planning his return. I started collecting small things, names, times, routines. When the administrator stepped out for lunch, when the mail truck arrived where the spare keys hung on the wall. No one noticed the old man reading his Bible in the corner. No one saw the notebook I kept tucked beneath it. They saw weakness. I saw opportunity. Days passed and my calm became my armor. When they took my phone, they thought they'd silenced me. But all they did was give me time to listen to the secrets in the hallways, to the rhythm of the building, to the way power moved from hand to hand. I realized the system wasn't built on compassion. It was built on control money signatures. And my son, he'd learned the system well. Too well. One evening, as the sun sank behind the parking lot painting everything gold, I looked around the dining room and saw not the forgotten, but the invisible army. Men and women like me, discarded, underestimated, still breathing. I thought, what if we stopped being quiet? What if we stopped accepting what was handed to us? That thought scared me. Then it thrilled me. I knew then that dignity wasn't a memory. It was a choice. That night I tore a sheet from my notebook and wrote one line. "You cannot erase a man who remembers who he is." I folded it, placed it inside my pillowcase, and lay back staring at the ceiling. The hum of the fluorescent lights above sounded like applause from a distant crowd. Somewhere down the hall, Ruby's voice echoed, humming an old church hymn, soft and low. I closed my eyes and smiled. They thought they'd locked me away, but all they did was give me the quiet I needed to plan. And when I finally walked out of that place, the world would remember my name. Ruby appeared when the world had turned gray around me. A young nurse with warm brown skin and kind eyes that seemed to hold both fire and sorrow. Her braids were tucked neatly beneath her cap, and she carried herself with the quiet grace of someone raised in faith and hard work. I remember the moment she looked at me, really looked at me. Not like I was another chart or a room number, but like I was a man who still mattered. "Sir," she said softly, "you don't belong here." 5 words, just 5. But they cracked something open in me that I didn't even know had gone cold. I watched her move through the room, adjusting my blanket, checking my vitals. There was a rhythm to her, steady, sure, compassionate, without pity. The kind you only see in people who've known struggle but never surrendered to it. My grandmama used to say, she told me one morning, "Ain't no storm lasts forever. You just gotta remember you're built for the rain." I almost laughed. "Your grandma sounds like she's been through some weather." Ruby smiled. "She still is." There was a glow in her eyes when she said it, like she carried her grandmother's strength in her chest. She started visiting more often, sometimes bringing me extra coffee, sometimes sitting by the window while I fixed the loose hinge on my nightstand. She'd hum old gospel tunes, soft low ones that made the air feel alive again. One day I asked her why she worked here. She shrugged. Because someone's got to remind folks they're not invisible. That line hit me harder than she knew. Because that's what I'd become: transparent. A man others looked through. Ruby had this way of making silence feel warm instead of empty. We'd talk about life outside her church choir, her little brother trying to get into college, her mom's famous sweet potato pie. It wasn't just small talk. It was life trickling back into a place built to drain it out. I hadn't smiled in weeks before she came. Now I caught myself grinning at things that didn't deserve it. One evening she came in later than usual. Her eyes looked tired red around the edges. I asked if she was all right. She hesitated, then said, "My brother got stopped by the police again. Wrong place, wrong time." She laughed, but it didn't reach her eyes. "He's a good kid, works 2 jobs. But to them, he's just another black boy in a hoodie." I didn't know what to say. The truth was, I'd lived long enough to see that story too many times. I wanted to tell her the world doesn't change, but she cut me off, saying it changes when we make it. That was Ruby Hope wrapped in steel. After that night, something shifted between us. It wasn't romance. It was something purer, a shared understanding. The kind that happens when 2 people recognize the fight in each other. I told her about Malik, about how he'd taken everything and called it love. She didn't pity me. She just nodded, then said quietly, "He took your trust. Don't let him take your purpose too." I sat with that long after she left. Purpose. It had been so long since I'd thought about that word. One morning Ruby brought me a box of old tools she found in storage: rusted screwdrivers, a cracked wrench, a bent tape measure. "Figured you'd know what to do with these," she said with a grin. That afternoon I went to work fixing things around the ward. Loose chair legs, broken curtain rods, creaky door hinges. The staff laughed, but they let me. Even the administrator didn't stop me. Maybe he thought it kept me busy. But what I was really doing was remembering who I was. A builder, a man who made things right with his own 2 hands. With every repair, a piece of me returned. The old confidence, the precision, the patience. Ruby started calling me Mr. Fix-It. I started calling her Little Light. It fit her. She carried light wherever she went, even into rooms where people had forgotten what daylight looked like. Then one afternoon, as I was tightening a bolt on a walker, Ruby leaned close and whispered, "You trust me, right?" I nodded. She slipped a folded piece of paper into my palm. "Don't open it until tonight," she said. Her voice was different, urgent, serious. That night, when the hallways went dark and the hum of machines filled the silence, I unfolded it under my bedside lamp. Inside was a handwritten note and something small, an old church keychain with a hidden flash drive attached. The note said, "Mr. Grant, I think someone's been using your name. I found files in the admin office, bank account signatures. Don't say anything yet. Just trust me." My pulse thundered in my ears. I turned the flash drive over in my hands. My name scratched into the plastic. Ruby had found something. Proof. For the first time, the fog around my situation began to clear. My son wasn't just careless, he was deliberate. Everything, the power of attorney, the locked phone, the false kindness, it was a setup. A quiet theft disguised as protection. The next day, Ruby acted normal. Cheerful, even. She winked as she passed me my tray. "Eat up, Mr. Fix-It." Big day ahead. I played along, but inside I was a storm waiting for the right moment to break. That night she met me in the chapel again. The candlelight flickered across her face as she whispered I made copies. "You need to get them out." I didn't ask how she'd done it. I just asked why. "Because my grandma says when you see wrong, you make it right. No matter who's watching." She handed me a small envelope. "There's a lawyer, Deshaun Carter. He's good people. Used to help my mom's church with elder cases. He'll listen. I wanted to thank her, but the words stuck in my throat. Ruby just smiled and said, "You don't owe me thanks. Just promise me one thing, don't fade." That night I didn't sleep. I kept hearing her words echo in my head. Don't fade. I thought of all the people here who already had their lives reduced to silence, their names buried under paperwork. Not me. Not anymore. I sat up watching the first light of dawn spill through the window. It felt different this time. Like the world was waiting on me to move. Ruby gave me more than evidence. She gave me purpose. She reminded me that I wasn't a victim. I was a man who'd been underestimated. I pressed the flash drive into my hand, feeling its edges dig into my skin. It was small, but it carried weight, the kind that could change everything. When the breakfast bell rang, I stood taller. My reflection in the mirror looked sharper, alive again. Ruby passed by in the hallway, and for a split second our eyes met. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. We both knew something was coming, and when it did, it would shake this place and my son's world down to its very foundation. The Bible looked old enough to crumble in my hands. Its leather cover was cracked, its pages thin as onion skin edges, browned from time and grief. Ruby found it on a forgotten nightstand while changing sheets in a room no one had used for months. She brushed off the dust, opened it halfway, and something fluttered out, a folded piece of paper. She picked it up and laughed softly. "Would you look at that?" she said, handing it to me. "An old lottery ticket. Maybe the Lord's leaving you something, Mr. Grant." She winked and set it on my nightstand like it meant nothing. But something about it lingered. The ink was faded, the paper soft at the folds. Someone once held it tight, maybe prayed over it, then left it behind to die with the rest of their memories. I slipped it between the Bible's pages again, not ready to hope for anything. That night the storm came in low and mean. Rain beat against the windows, thunder grumbled like an old man with a grudge. The power flickered twice before settling into a nervous hum. I couldn't sleep. The air felt thick, charged, waiting. I kept looking at that Bible, its spine catching the light every time lightning flashed. Finally, curiosity or something divine got the better of me. I reached for the ticket, smoothed it open on my knee, and stared at the numbers. The date said almost a year ago. Expired, I figured. Still, I found myself whispering, "All right, Lord, if this means something, show me." I walked down the hall to the rec room where the TV was always left on mute. The screen glowed with one of those endless infomercials, faces selling hope for 3 easy payments. I changed the channel to the local news, turned up the volume just enough to hear. They were showing last week's winning lottery numbers, the same ones printed on that ticket. My breath caught. I blinked, leaned closer. 1 number matched, then 2, then all 6. I sat back, heart pounding so hard it hurt. For a long moment I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Then I laughed, a low, disbelieving laugh that grew into something sharp, wild, alive. I wasn't supposed to be here, not in this place, not forgotten. And yet somehow in this building built on silence, a miracle had found me. I looked up at the ceiling, whispering, "You really do have a sense of humor, don't you?" The storm outside broke open harder, the thunder rolling like applause. I folded the ticket and slipped it into my shoe. Not my pocket, too risky. My shoe was closer to my skin, safer. It felt right there, like walking on a secret. The next morning I woke up before sunrise. The air smelled like wet asphalt and renewal. Ruby came in humming, his eye as on the sparrow, her braids damp from the rain. She noticed the way I was smiling. "What's got you looking like the cat that caught the canary?" I wanted to tell her. I wanted to grab her hands and say, "You were right." The Lord really did leave me something. But something in me said to wait. Secrets have power when they're quiet. "So I just said I slept good for the first time in a while?" She nodded, approving. "See, I told you. God moves when we stop trying to control the plan. All day I moved differently, lighter. The same hallways that used to feel like a cage now looked like temporary walls. I fixed a broken chair for one of the residents, and when they thanked me, I smiled wider than usual. I wasn't trapped anymore. I was just in a waiting room and I already had the key to the door, but freedom never comes easy. That evening I overheard the administrator talking near the nurses' station. Grant's account's been cleared. The son said to sell the property and move funds by Monday. My hands froze on the railing. Sell the property. My house. The one I built. The one my wife died in. The one my son hadn't earned a single board of. Rage boiled up so fast it made me dizzy, but beneath it was calm. Because now I had something he didn't. Power. Real power. Later that night I sat in the chapel again, holding the ticket between my fingers. Ruby walked in quietly, sat beside me without a word. After a while she said, "You look like a man carrying more than prayer." I turned the ticket over once, twice, and finally handed it to her. "You ever seen a miracle on paper?" She looked down, frowned, then gasped. "Wait, no. Are you—" I nodded. 6 for 6. Her mouth dropped open, but she didn't shout or scream. She just started laughing, this beautiful, relieved laugh that filled the whole chapel. "You serious? You sitting here in this place with a winning ticket in your shoe?" I grinned. Guess the Lord didn't want me going out quiet. She covered her mouth, shaking her head. "You know this might be the wildest blessing I've ever seen. But you can't cash that alone. You need help, real help." I leaned back, looking at the cross above the altar. "That lawyer you mentioned, Deshaun Carter. Think he'd believe me?" Ruby smirked. "He'll believe me. He's family." The next morning, while the staff bustled through their routines, Ruby slipped me a small envelope. Inside was a prepaid phone, the kind that couldn't be traced easily. "Call him at noon," she whispered. "He'll know what to do." I clutched that phone like it was oxygen. When noon came, I locked myself in the bathroom and dialed. The voice on the other end was calm, measured. "Mr. Grant, Ruby told me a bit. If what you're saying is true, we need to move quickly. The ticket has to be verified before your son makes any legal transfers." My pulse hammered. "How do we do that?" he replied, carefully. The next 2 days felt like living inside a movie. Ruby smuggled out my identification papers from the admin office, God knows how, and Deshaun met her in the parking lot to collect them. Every step had to be quiet and visible. My son still thought I was docile, broken, tucked away. But I was moving in the shadows, building something he couldn't see coming. By the third night, I had everything ready. The ticket, the phone, the lawyer, the proof that I wasn't powerless anymore. I sat by the window watching the rain return. Every drop against the glass sounded like a clock ticking toward Judgment Day. For years I'd prayed for justice. I just never imagined it would come with a lottery ticket and a nurse who believed in miracles. When the dawn came, the first light hit my Bible on the nightstand, reflecting across the room. I picked it up, ran my fingers over the worn cover, and whispered, "Thank you." I didn't just mean for the money. I meant for Ruby. For the reminder that life could surprise you even when you've stopped expecting it. I tucked the Bible under my arm, straightened my shirt, and smiled at my reflection in the window. For the first time in a long time, the man staring back didn't look like a victim. He looked ready. And what I did next, it wasn't luck, it was justice. The plan began in whispers late at night, when the halls went quiet, and the hum of machines was the only sound left. Ruby sat beside me, a notepad on her lap, her eyes sharp beneath the soft light of the lamp. "If you're going to walk out of here, Mr. Grant," she said, "you're not walking out as the same man who came in." Her words hung in the air like scripture. I looked down at my hands, calloused, cracked, still steady, and nodded. I'd been rebuilding other people's lives my whole life. It was time to rebuild mine. Deshaun entered the picture a week later. Ruby's cousin, young, polished, with a voice that carried confidence and a hint of defiance. He visited on the pretense of legal counseling for elder residents, flashing that polite smile that fooled the staff, but not me. I knew the look of a fighter when I saw one. He sat across from me, opened his briefcase, and said, "Mr. Grant, Ruby tells me you've been wronged." I don't do charity, but I do justice." Those words hit deep. He laid out papers, trust documents, estate plans, a new identification folder. "We'll start by taking your name back," he said, "before your son takes the rest." I told him everything, every signature I didn't give, every account my son touched, every lie wrapped in a lawyer's letterhead. He listened without interrupting, eyes dark with focus. When I finished, he leaned back, steepling his fingers. "He thinks you're buried," he said. "Let's make him believe it." That's when the plan shifted from survival to strategy. Step 1. Disappear. Legally, quietly. Deshawn filed papers under a new name, Joseph Gray. It wasn't far from Grant, but different enough to pass. He moved my lottery winnings into a trust under that new identity, one my son couldn't trace. The account sat under layers of protection even banks would struggle to crack. Ruby became my accomplice, sneaking in forms, relaying messages through coded notes tucked inside prayer books. Every night we mapped it all out. Escape routes, transfer dates, timing down to the minute. I watched myself in the mirror those nights, the way my shoulders began to square again, the way the years seemed to peel back. My reflection no longer looked beaten. It looked ready. "You sure you can do this?" Ruby asked one night. "You're talking about starting over at 65. I smiled. "I've started over before. This time, I'm just smarter." Deshawn moved fast. By the second week, he'd arranged the trust and contacted the state lottery office on my behalf through his firm. The winnings were real, verified, and legally mine. What Malik didn't know was that the money never existed in his world anymore. The system showed my accounts empty. To him, I was a broke old man fading into the walls of a nursing home. I let him believe it. The more we planned, the more I realized that freedom wasn't just about walking out those doors. It was about reclaiming the man I used to be, the one who taught his son how to build a house from the ground up, who prayed before every meal, who worked hard and stood tall. They thought I'd forgotten how to fight. But I'd learned strategy long before any of them were born on construction sites, where you had to think 3 steps ahead or end up crushed in church basements, where sermons doubled as survival lessons in life itself, where every mistake teaches you who to trust. When the day came, the air felt electric. Ruby handed me a plain gray jacket and a baseball cap. "You walk slow, you smile, you nod," she said. "They won't see what they're not looking for." I laughed softly. "You sure you weren't trained for espionage?" She winked. "Church ushers know more about stealth than the CIA." I moved through the halls like I belonged, head down, the morning light spilling across the linoleum. The receptionist greeted me absently, thinking I was one of the volunteers. Outside, the cold hit me like a baptism. The sky was wide and blue, too bright for someone who hadn't seen it without bars or blinds in months. Deshawn's car was waiting at the edge of the lot, a silver sedan engine running. He opened the door, smiled, and said, "Welcome back to the world, Mr. Gray." We drove without talking for a long time, the city unfolding around us like a memory I'd almost lost. The hum of traffic, the smell of exhaust, the rhythm of life, all of it felt new and ancient at once. Finally, I said, "He took everything I gave him. My trust, my name, my home." Deshawn glanced over. "Then take something he can't steal. Take back your story." We stopped at a small church on the south side, one of those old brick ones with a crooked cross on top. Ruby met us there after her shift, her scrubs hidden under a coat. Inside, the sanctuary was empty except for the echo of our footsteps. We stood in front of the altar, the stained glass spilling color across the floor. I pulled out the folded lottery ticket and set it on the table. "This is where it ends," I said. Ruby frowned. "You sure?" I nodded. "No more running. Time to build." That day we founded something new, a trust for people like me, elders who'd been cheated, forgotten, buried under paperwork. The plan was simple: help them fight back the way I had. We called it the Grant Foundation for Justice, though legally it bore my new name. Ruby would manage the community side. Deshawn would handle the legal fight. I would be the story, the proof that you can't silence experience or steal dignity forever. Weeks later, the papers caught wind of it. Anonymous benefactor donates millions to protect the elderly from financial abuse. My son saw the headline. He called the home, demanded to speak with me. The nurse told him I wasn't there. He passed, she said gently, peacefully. I imagined the silence that followed on his end, the confusion, the guilt, the slow crawl of realization that his father had outsmarted him. That night I stood in my small new apartment looking out over the city lights. I was free. Not just from the nursing home, but from the man I'd let the world turn me into. Ruby called to check in. "You all right, Mr. Grant?" she asked. I smiled. "Call me Joseph." "The old man you knew, he's gone." She laughed. "Well then, Mr. Joseph, what's next?" I looked out at the skyline, the hum of life below, and felt that old spark again. "Next," I said, "I build something worth leaving behind." And what I built after that? Well, it made sure no one ever buried another father the way they tried to bury me. The envelope was thin, unassuming, the kind of thing you'd toss in the trash without a second thought. But when I opened it, the air in the room changed. Inside were copies of loan agreements, property transfers, and bank withdrawals, all under my name. My signature scrawled at the bottom of every page, neat, practiced, perfect. Except they weren't mine. My hand started to shake as I traced the lines, recognizing every letter and still knowing they weren't written by me. Malik had learned to forge my name. My own son had turned my life into currency. The betrayal didn't come like thunder. It came like a slow burn that crawled up from the gut and set every nerve on fire. I stared at those papers for a long time, waiting for disbelief to turn into something else. It didn't. It just sat there, heavy and poisonous. He'd taken loans against the house I built, drained savings I'd spent a lifetime earning, even used my Social Security to secure a business line. A business that didn't exist. He hadn't just robbed me. He'd erased me. My name, my credit, my identity, all stripped away and repackaged for his convenience. I thought about every time I'd told him a man's word is his bond. I thought about the lessons I'd drilled into him when he was a boy. Don't lie. Don't steal. Stand tall even when it's hard. He'd taken those words, twisted them, and weaponized them against me. There's a special kind of pain when the hand that used to hold yours becomes the one that stabs you. Ruby was standing across the room watching me with quiet concern. "You okay?" she asked, even though we both knew the answer. I couldn't speak. The papers lay on the table like evidence in a trial I never agreed to. She stepped closer, her voice soft. "He's your son, but he's also a man who made a choice. Don't carry his sin like it's yours." I wanted to believe her. But the weight of fatherhood doesn't fade just because your child turns into a stranger. When Deshawn came later that evening, he took one look at my face and didn't ask questions. He just sat down, flipped through the papers, and whistled low. "He's good," he said, not with admiration but with warning. These signatures would fool a judge. He paused, then met my eyes. But he made one mistake. He filed something under the wrong date. That's how we nail him. The next days blurred into strategy sessions. Deshawn made calls, pulled records, traced transactions. Ruby handled logistics, smuggling out documents when the staff wasn't looking. I handled the rage. Quietly, methodically. I carried it like a tool, not a weapon, sharp, controlled, ready. I didn't scream. I didn't curse. I learned long ago that real power doesn't shout. It waits. One night I sat alone in the chapel, the papers spread out across the pews like a confession. I whispered, "Why, boy?" My voice echoed off the stone walls. "I gave you everything I had. Why'd you have to take what I didn't give?" The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, almost alive. Somewhere deep down I knew the answer. He didn't want my money. He wanted my power. He wanted to be the man I was without earning the scars that came with it. When dawn came, I made my decision. The reckoning wouldn't come with fists or shouting. It would come with truth, and truth when handled right is lethal. Deshawn drafted the motion. Fraud, forgery, elder exploitation, financial abuse. Words that looked too clean on paper for what they really meant. Each one felt like a nail driven into something sacred but necessary. The court date came faster than I expected. Ruby insisted on coming with me, said I shouldn't face it alone. I wore my best suit navy, pressed the same one I'd worn the day I was abandoned at that nursing home. When we walked into the courthouse, the air felt cold, sterile. Malik was already there, standing near his attorney, looking like he'd stepped straight out of one of those glossy lifestyle ads. Expensive suit polish shoes, a confidence that came from thinking you'll never get caught. When he saw me, his expression faltered for a split second, just long enough to show the fear underneath. Then he smiled. "Dad," he said, voice slick, false warmth dripping from every syllable. "You shouldn't be here. You don't understand." I cut him off. "I understand plenty." My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The silence that followed was louder than any shouting could have been. The hearing was short, clinical. Documents were presented, evidence laid out. The judge's expression hardened with every page. When it was over, the room felt still, almost reverent. The judge turned to me and said, "Mr. Grant, it appears your son has indeed committed fraud and theft in your name. The court rules in your favor. You are restored as sole trustee and owner of all assets." Malik's face drained of color. For the first time I saw him not as my boy, but as a man stripped bare, greedy, small, lost. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The bailiff stepped forward to guide him out, and in that moment something in me cracked open. Not relief, not triumph. Grief. The kind that comes when you bury someone who's still breathing. Outside the courthouse, the sun hit my face like forgiveness. Ruby stood beside me silent, her hand resting lightly on my arm. Deshawn came out behind us, paperwork in hand, his grin wide. "You're officially a free man," he said. I nodded, though the word felt strange. Free. After everything, freedom didn't feel like joy. It felt like quiet. We stood there for a while, watching cars pass, the world moving like it didn't just witness a war end. Finally, Ruby said, "You did what you had to do." I looked down at my hands, the same hands that had once built a home, held a baby, fixed everything that broke except this. "Yeah," I said softly, "I did." That night, back in my apartment, I sat by the window, the city lights reflecting off the glass. The papers from the trial lay on the table, neat and final. I picked up the Bible Ruby had given me months ago, the same one that hid that winning ticket, and opened it to the first blank page. I wrote, "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means I refuse to carry his sin any longer." I closed the book, exhaled, and for the first time in years the silence around me didn't feel empty. It felt earned. And what came after that? That was when I stopped surviving and started building again. The courthouse smelled like old wood and rain. I remember the echo of my shoes on the marble floor, steady and deliberate like a drumbeat announcing I was done being silent. I wore my Sunday best navy suit, pressed shoes, polished, tie straight. The same suit I'd worn to my wife's funeral, the same one I'd worn the day my son left me at that nursing home. It fit better now, not because I'd grown into it, but because I'd earned it back. Every thread carried something heavier than fabric, dignity, fury, faith. Ruby and Deshawn flanked me like family. We didn't speak. We didn't have to. The moment was already loud enough. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with low murmurs that died as I entered. Malik was there, sitting beside his lawyer, hands folded too neatly, pretending composure. His suit was expensive, but couldn't hide the sweat beating at his temple. When his eyes met mine, I saw it, the flicker of guilt he tried to bury under arrogance. He looked at me like a man seeing a ghost he thought he'd buried. I gave him nothing back. The judge entered, a woman with silver hair pulled tight and a face carved from stone. She glanced over the case file before lifting her eyes to me. "Mr. Grant," she said, We're here to determine your competence, ownership rights, and the validity of the financial documents under dispute." Her tone was neutral, but her gaze wasn't. She was watching everything. My posture, my breath, my silence. I met her eyes and nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." My voice didn't waver. Deshaun rose first. He spoke with precision, each word measured and deliberate. "Your Honor, this case isn't just about money. It's about dignity. My client, Mr. Grant, worked his entire life for what was taken from him. His son, Malik Grant, forged documents, assumed control of accounts, and confined his father under false pretenses of care. He placed a stack of papers on the table, the forgeries, the loan statements, the medical reports. Each one a small knife cutting through the lies. Malik's lawyer tried to object, tried to spin it as concern for an aging parent. He spoke of confusion, of misplaced trust, of misunderstanding. But the more he talked, the more it all sounded like noise. Then Deshaun called Ruby to the stand. She took her oath with steady hands, her voice clear. "I worked at the facility where Mr. Grant was placed. He wasn't confused. He wasn't sick. He was trapped." She looked straight at the judge, her tone sharpened with conviction. "I saw him fix broken furniture, repair doors, counsel other residents. He didn't belong there. He was put there to disappear." The courtroom went silent. You could hear the air change like a tide pulling back before it crashes. Malik shifted in his seat, jaw tight. His lawyer whispered something, but he didn't respond. I sat there unmoving, my hands folded in my lap. Years of raising that boy had taught me patience. I'd spent my life waiting for him to do right. Now I was waiting for justice to do the same. When Deshaun called me to the stand, I walked slowly but without hesitation. The clerk handed me the Bible. My thumb brushed over its cover before I said I do. As I sat, I could feel every pair of eyes on me. The judge, the lawyers, the audience people waiting to see if the old man still had fire left. I didn't disappoint. "I built my life with my hands," I said, voice low but clear. "Every dollar I earned was honest. Every promise I made I kept. I raised my son on that same truth. But somewhere along the way he learned the world's version of success, not mine. He learned how to take, not build." I paused, looking straight at Malik. He used my name like a weapon, and when he was done, he threw me away like I was already dead. The judge didn't interrupt. The room didn't breathe. "I'm not here for revenge," I said. "I'm here because I refuse to let lies outlive truth." When I stepped down, the silence carried weight. Deshaun gave me a nod, a quiet promise that we were almost there. The judge reviewed the documents one last time, flipping through them slowly, her expression unreadable. Then she looked up. "The evidence is clear," she said. "The court finds that Mr. Grant is of sound mind and body. The financial power of attorney granted to the defendant is hereby void. Full ownership of all assets is restored to Mr. Grant. Mr. Malik Grant is ordered to repay damages in full pending criminal investigation." Those words fell like thunder. For a moment no one moved. Then Malik's chair scraped back hard, his face a storm of disbelief. "You can't do this," he shouted, but the bailiff was already stepping forward. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. The man who once called me Dad had been replaced by someone I didn't recognize, and I was done searching for him. The gavel struck once, sharp, final. The sound echoed through the courtroom, bouncing off every wall, sealing the chapter shut. I exhaled slow and deep. It wasn't victory that filled me, it was release. Like a chain snapping after years of wait. Ruby touched my arm as we stood to leave. "You did it," she whispered. "No," I said. "We did." Outside, the sunlight hit hard, golden, and pure. The air smelled like rain evaporating from concrete, clean and new. Reporters were gathering, shouting questions, but I walked past them. I wasn't interested in headlines. Justice didn't need an audience. As we reached the steps, I stopped and looked back at the courthouse. Its tall pillars, its cold facade, the place where I'd just reclaimed my name. Deshaun shook my hand. "You handled that like a soldier," he said. I smiled faintly. "I've been in worse battles. This one just had air conditioning." He laughed, but his eyes were proud. We drove in silence for a while, city lights flickering past the window. I watched the world move, families walking, laughter spilling from diners, the hum of normal life resuming. I'd been outside of it for too long. Now I was back, and it felt like coming home. That night in my apartment, I poured 2 glasses of whiskey, one for me, one for the memory of my wife. "We did it, baby," I whispered. "We got our name back." I raised the glass to the empty chair beside me, the one that never really felt empty at all. But even as the warmth spread through my chest, I knew something was still waiting. The story wasn't over. Freedom was only the first step. What came next that would decide the kind of man I'd be remembered as? I didn't spend a single dollar on vengeance. The world expected me to, maybe even wanted me to. But revenge, I'd learned, was loud and short-lived. Justice, real justice, was quiet and eternal. So I took that lottery money, the same miracle that had pulled me out of the ashes, and built something that would last longer than any grudge. I called it the Joseph Grant Project. Not for vanity, not for legacy, but because every man who's ever been forgotten deserves to leave his name behind, carved into something good. The foundation started small. Just me, Ruby, and Deshaun sitting around the worn kitchen table in my apartment, legal pads spread out beside half-empty mugs of coffee. We didn't have an office, just faith. "What are we really doing here?" Ruby asked one night. I looked at her and said, "We're building armor for people like me, for the ones who got used, signed away, silenced." She smiled and wrote that down. It became our mission statement. Deshaun handled the paperwork, cutting through bureaucracy like a man on a mission. Ruby organized the volunteers, nurses, pastors, retired social workers, even a few former victims who wanted to help others fight back. Every day more letters arrived. People from across the country sent handwritten stories of betrayal of sons and daughters who stole, of caretakers who lied, of banks that looked the other way. I read every one of them. I couldn't save them all, but I could make sure their voices didn't vanish into the same silence I once sat in. Word spread faster than I expected. Churches invited me to speak, small towns sent busloads of elders to our community meetings, and local news ran stories calling me the man who fought back. I never liked that title. I wasn't a hero. I was the survivor who got tired of being quiet. But I showed up anyway, suit-pressed, voice steady, hands still rough from years of work. One Sunday morning, I stood at the pulpit of New Light Baptist, the same church I'd attended with my wife before everything fell apart. The pews were full, gray heads, canes, grandchildren fidgeting beside them. I could feel the air vibrating with that old church energy, the kind that starts low in the soul and rises up like fire. The choir had just finished Amazing Grace, and when I stepped up to the microphone, the room went still. I once thought growing old meant slowing down. I began. But the truth is, age don't weaken you, it reveals you. Some of us spend our lives working hard, loving deep, giving everything we have. And sometimes the world takes advantage of that. Sometimes even your own blood turns on you. I paused, looking across the crowd. But hear me when I say this, we ain't too old to fight for our dignity. The congregation erupted, amen's applause, tears. I saw men gripping their wives' hands, women nodding through tears, young folks filming on their phones. That's when I realized this wasn't just my story anymore. It belonged to all of us, to every person who'd ever been underestimated because of gray hair or slow steps. After that service, a line of people formed down the aisle just to shake my hand. One woman pressed a folded photo into my palm. "That's my father," she said. "He lost everything to a scam. But he watched your story on TV. Said it gave him peace." I looked at the photo, a man smiling in front of his old workshop, pride still in his eyes despite the years. I nodded and said, "Then let's make sure no one else has to learn the hard way." Weeks turned into months. and the Joseph Grant Project grew beyond anything I could have imagined. We opened a small office in Atlanta, then another in Birmingham. We partnered with local banks to educate elders on fraud prevention, helped hundreds reclaim stolen assets, and trained caregivers on ethics and empathy. Ruby became our director of community outreach, though she still showed up every Sunday with sweet potato pie like it was a ritual. Deshaun joined a national legal coalition to push for stricter elder protection laws. He said my story was the spark they needed to get Congress to listen. Sometimes I'd walk through our office in the evenings when everyone had gone home. The sound of printers cooling, the faint hum of lights, the smell of coffee lingering in the air, it reminded me of the construction sites from my younger days. The tools were different now, but the work was the same. Building something that would stand the test of time. Every now and then I'd think of Malik. I didn't hate him anymore. Hate is heavy, and I'd carried enough weight already. I heard through the grapevine that he'd taken a plea deal, avoided prison, and moved somewhere out west. I hoped he found whatever piece of his soul he'd lost chasing greed. I prayed for him quietly like my wife would have wanted. Forgiveness wasn't a favor to him, it was freedom for me. One afternoon, Ruby came into my office holding an envelope. "You got a letter," she said, handing it to me with that same knowing smile. I opened it slowly. Inside was a note written in shaky handwriting. "Dad, I don't expect forgiveness, but I'm trying to be better. I started volunteering at a senior center. They said your foundation helped them get funding. Maybe that's how I start making things right." There was no signature, just an old family photo tucked inside the three of us at a cookout, my wife holding Malik as a boy. For the first time in years, I smiled without sadness. That Sunday, I brought the letter to church. I didn't read it aloud, but I held it in my hand as I spoke. "Grace," I told the congregation, "isn't weakness. It's strength in disguise. God's justice don't always roar, it whispers. And sometimes that whisper saves more lives than a shout ever could." When the choir sang "I Won't Complain," I closed my eyes and let the sound wash over me. The years of bitterness, fear, loss, they all dissolved into something lighter. Peace, maybe. Purpose, definitely. That night, as I sat on my porch watching the sun drop behind the city skyline, I thought about the journey, how a betrayal had turned into a blessing, how silence had become a movement. The street below buzzed with life, kids laughing, gospel music playing from a passing car. I felt my wife's presence in that moment, warm and sure, like she was whispering, "You did good, baby." I raised my glass of sweet tea to the sky. "Here's to grace," I said quietly, "the kind that rebuilds what the world tried to break." And somewhere deep in my heart, I knew my story wasn't ending. It was just becoming something bigger, something that would outlive me, carried by every hand that learned from it, every soul that refused to be erased. Life has a way of testing us long after we think our battles are over. My story taught me that dignity doesn't retire with age, it strengthens. Betrayal can break your heart, but it can also sharpen your vision. What happened to me could happen to any elder who trusts too much and questions too little. But faith, wisdom, and community can turn even the worst wounds into purpose. The Joseph Grant Project wasn't born out of anger, it was born out of grace. It reminded me and everyone like me that our value doesn't fade when the world stops listening. Every wrinkle carries a story, every scar a lesson, every gray hair a crown, earned through endurance. So to everyone in their golden years, don't let anyone write your final chapter for you. Stand up for your dignity, protect your legacy, and know that it's never too late to start again. If my story moved you, share it. Subscribe for more stories that honor strength, wisdom, and second chances. And tell me in the comments what grace means to you.